This podcast is brought to you by the Islamic Center and NYU. For more information, visit our website at www.icnyu.org.
For those of you who are just joining us after this long series, we are in the process of discussing Qisas al-Anbiya, the stories of the prophets, and more importantly than just their narrations, but to really look at their life and to look at what aspects of their life are we able to draw lessons from, what aspects of their life are we able to look at certain parallels in our own personal lives as well as in the society. And subhanAllah, also to look at some of the challenges that they faced and what kind of lessons can I draw from them, what kind of strength, what kind of insight, what kind of guidance can I have for it? Because these stories are stories that are detailed in the Quran. And Allah reminds us, do not take them as tales of the ancient, meaning that Allah Ta'ala is like, I'm not telling you bedtime stories. I'm not telling you the stories of the prophets for no other reason, just to entertain you. I'm detailing these stories in these narrations for a multitude of reasons, but especially so that we may all extract guidance from it, so that we may understand that, if for me, one of the biggest things is that to say that that religion is not something, that it's not something, what's the word I want to say, that it's consistent, it's throughout time, it's something that isn't just, a new idea, or not even so much about a new idea, but that when new things crop up, Allah is saying, listen, this is something I addressed a long time ago, and that same stance is beneficial to up until today, which is why I'm detailing for you this story. So the beautiful thing about the Quran and it being the living miracle is that the Quran as a living miracle, it's like it literally keeps expanding. As our universe expands, as our knowledge expands, as the road of the universe begins to unfold, as the aspects of our life begin to unfold, there are a number of things that crop up. There are a number of circumstances. There are a number of situations that we find ourselves in that guidance becomes necessary. Especially if we are to look at some of the most recent happenings, even in the case of Palestine. I find that in looking at the case of Palestine, I just recently was having a conversation, a really much needed conversation, a very welcome conversation with my family recently about Israel and Palestine and the timeline. Because subhanAllah, sometimes we actually think of something as okay, this is a long time. Right? Like this is so long ago, I don't even understand where is the relevance in our life. But then when we see certain situations about for example, the connection between Palestine and our current reality, right? The current state of affairs in the world and how that affects millions, if not billions of people. But then in even how our struggles are connected to each other. For example, how deeply the Palestinian conflict is connected even to the Black Lives Matter movement, connected to the fight for civil rights, as we collaborate into this fold, this week, actually, it just becomes for me something just so amazing as I begin to look at, we cross over May 19th in, the birthday of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Allah Yurhamuhum, and then into Malcolm X Day at the end of that week. We then fold over into the anniversary of the massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, while at the same time, looking at what's happening in Palestine. And many of us may not see necessarily the connection, the relationship between the two, may think that these things are absolutely not connected to each other. But in reality, they have everything to do with each other. If you were to look at Palestine, Palestine, 1921, right? You're going to see something, a very independent people, a very free people, a people who are living their life in such a way that there's a level of autonomy, right? There's a level of autonomy and establishment even after some time of struggle. So you're going to see this kind of, a do for self attitude. You're going to see this kind of, a well-built cities and well-developed neighborhoods. And you're going to see even the emergence of technology going from the 20s well into the 30s. And this is actually something that when we look at that exactly 100 years ago, you find some of the very same things that's actually happening right in Oklahoma, in the middle of America, right? But then yet you have this, there becomes like within 20 to 25 years, you have this major shift that happens. That then people, when we look at it 100 years later, people say, well, these people were always in shambles. They were never able to be autonomous. They were never able to achieve a certain level. They were never able to be self-sufficient. That they were always in need of someone else. That literally history forgets itself. Right? And so understanding like the same bombs that were dropped on Tulsa, Oklahoma in the 1920s, and this is something, subhanallah bihamdi, subhanallah adim, that precedes the birth of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, right? Like just in terms of time frame, it happens like right at the time that he's being born, that this happens, and then we get the likes of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. Then we find him later, Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, in the later part of his life, actually toward closer to his assassination, closer to his murder. We find him visit Gaza. And he gives this detailed description of Gaza and the level of apartheid and oppression, and he very much relates it to himself. Now, why do I tell that story tonight when we're talking about Qisas and Anbiya? Well, you've got to know your history and your connection to Palestine as a Muslim. And if you understand our history and our connection to Palestine as a Muslim and what our love for it should be, and our the drive that should exist in our heart for its peace, for the people to live in what peace is. When Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Allah yarhamuhu, returned back from Palestine, is when he gave that statement that there is no freedom without peace. Right? There is no peace, without freedom. Meaning, like, let me let you know that until a people are free, there's not going to be any peace. So for us to kind of have this, forgive me for a lack of a better term at this moment, kind of this Rodney King moment of, can't we all just get along, right? Can't we just like sprinkle some peace dust over it, and then it'll just be peaceful? Well, you've got to have some history lessons on that to understand why that can't happen. You've got to understand what happened in 1948 that changed the trajectory of a people, that now makes us look at them and say, well, did they ever have peace? Right? Like there's always, we find generations of people who make statements like, well, they've always been fighting, right? There's always been war. Very similar to the way that people almost describe as if Black folk have some kind of pathology, right? Like, oh, there's always been fighting, right? There's always been uproar, or there's always been poverty. Well, no, actually there was Black Wall Street, right? They are not just an immoral people, right? They had the likes of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz that was not only about hatred, but was like standing up for what's right, for liberation and autonomy, and having a path of Islam, use Islam as the backdrop as well as the road forward out of the tragedies. I'm a little passionate about it this week, so I hope you guys forgive me as I begin to open up for us. How do we begin this relationship with the beloved Palestine? It was a couple years ago, about 3 years ago. I was blessed to be able to go on a trip. And And no, not one of those brainwashing ones, just in case anybody's wondering. Not one of those brainwashing ones where they try to convince you of something else. That wasn't the case. But I was blessed to go on a trip with a delegation to kind of actually delve a lot deeper into the reality of the Palestinian conflict. And it's something that just would always stick in my heart as I was able actually to go stand in front of the Black Panther office in Palestine, in Jerusalem, in Jerusalem, and just stand there amazed that there was even something called the Black Panther Party of Palestine. And to me actually have the opportunity to meet with one of them and to talk about their connection between, from the time of the civil rights movement into current day. Of course, as we know that many of them were advising even movements as it happened from the time of Michael Brown riots in Ferguson, and even more recently, when we look at some of the tactics that are being used. I'm blessed to go into Khalil in Hebron, which some years ago, one of the biggest news stories that stuck out to me about Hebron was about how they were Muslims who were in Salatul Fajr. And while they were praying, that someone came into the masjid and opened fire on them while they were in the most vulnerable position, while they were in sujood and prostration. And I think the most shocking, everything about stepping inside of that mosque was eye-opening and shocking, one after another. But one of the most things that was shocking about it inside of this mosque in Hebron and Khalil was that Prophet Ibrahim is where his maqam is. It's where, it said that where his grave is next to Ishaq and Yaqub. And I remember thinking, that this, in terms of being the opener, and for there to be one who was so committed to the religious freedom. And I say this because you might say, well, how was he committed to religious freedom? Because we as Muslims need to recognize that one of the greatest religious oppressions, if you don't know who your God is, that one of the things that will lead you into oppressing other people or accepting it is that if you don't know that Allahu Akbar, if you're not aware of the greatness and the power of Allah Azza wa Jal as your Lord, then it's possible for you to get it twisted that human beings could be your God and therefore are entitled to a certain type of power over you. But once Allah teaches you that Allah is your Lord and that slavehood is to none else, that once you recognize the autonomy that Allah Azza wa Jal gives you as in a human being, and the one who will answer your prayers, the one who will give you the strength to stand up, to keep moving, to move forward, to build civilization, and to have the steadfastness, the kind of internal peace that says, in the midst of whoever is trying to kill me and my family or my wife, in the midst of those who want to throw me in the depths of the fire, in the midst of the ones who wish I would just go away and stop talking about such things, that when you have that understanding of La ilaha illallah, then what does it do? How does it change you? How does it evolve your global thinking? And what type of oppression does it say, I just simply cannot accept? And of course, the greatest oppression that makes it impossible to accept is the oppression of the soul, the oppression of the intellect, that I should be bowing down to any portion of the Halaqa, to any portion of the creation. And so as I look at so many identities coming together within this month, when I look at, come from the end of May, folding into June, kind of like, I feel like Allah, sometimes he unravels something, like he pours us out of Ramadan, right? And as he pours us out of Ramadan, it's like literally hit the ground running as everything begins to open up. The struggle is back on and popping. right? Like it's back on. And it's like, remember who you are, remember who your ancestors are, right? And this becomes important, especially in the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, like knowing what tradition will you follow, right? What traditions will you follow, and what traditions do you have to throw behind your back because they don't serve you, because they don't benefit you, because they're not meant for your akhirah, because they're not meant to free you, because they're not meant to elevate you. There's some tradition you're like, I gotta let that go. That's not from Allah Azza wa Jal. That's not consistent with who the greatness for which He created me to be. That's inconsistent. But looking at the legacy of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz and the constant fires that Allah made cool and safe for him, and the constant fires that were lit, like in Tulsa, Oklahoma, for the likes of many reasons, to be able to say that Islam is the solution, the map to get out of oppression, and that which is long lasting, that which is a testimony of truth and justice and the power of Allah Azza wa Jal. Because it also speaks to that which is beyond the dunya, beyond the realm, right? So when we're talking about aqidah, when we're talking about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worshiping Allah as He is, one of the biggest aspects that we understand is the reality beyond this one. This is like, we got to get that. We got to embrace that yaqeen, certainty, is to believe despite the apparent reality, to think that this dunya is the beginning and the end of existence is idolatry in and of itself. This is like some of the one of the most internal lessons that are hidden inside of worshiping stones and idols, is that if you think that the khalq, that the creation of something is the ultimate reality of a thing, then you have really missed the mark. And the interaction with the world will not be the same. The way that we will then interact with worldly matters will be different. If you believe that this is as good as it gets, if we believe that the brick and mortar, that the institution, that the building, that the idols of society are as good as it gets, then we might not, then oppression would be appealing. Do whatever I have, do whatever you have to do to be the one that's on top. Even sell people a false god. Even sell them a false god if it makes me on top. That's what the reality of worshiping idols is about. It's not just these, silly looking cravings of wood and stone. Allah Azza wa Jal is trying to teach us that if your belief only goes as far as the creation, if you're not connected to the reality of the unseen, if you're not connected to the reality of the creator, who is the one behind all of it, if you don't understand that beyond the brick and the mortar, beyond the mud and water put together, beyond the earth and the water put together, beyond the wood that's fallen in the woods and chopped by your own hands, if you think that's the reality of it, then you're in trouble. That is a prison all by itself. That is a cave all by itself. And so when we're reading these stories of the Anbiya, of the prophets, and we thank Allah Azza wa Jal for the wisdom He gives us and the insight that He gives us. Like, why is He constantly repeating to us about the stories of the idols? Right, one people after another, because ultimately they never believed they were going to meet Allah. They really believe like the dunya, right? The earth and water and wood and clay, that was it. And if you believe that's it, all of the dangers internally and externally that come as a result of that, you will just fight tooth and nail. You will climb on someone else's back to climb the corporate ladder or the whatever ladder. You will rob, steal, kill, rape, and maim if you don't believe in the ghaib. If morality is not connected to a greater reality, why? I mean, if when I'm dead, I'm done, then why? If this creation will return back to the earth and that's it, and there's no one to answer to beyond this world, beyond the bricks and the stones and the money buildings and the institutions and the this and the that, if there's nothing else I have to answer to other than the IRS or the FBI or the CIA or the powers that be or the court or the judge or the, or the bank, if there's no one else, if it's just a brick and mortar institution I have to answer to, then let's get it. Let's make it happen. Let's blow it up. Let's do whatever. وَإِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. وَإِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ. This is not just about a jealous God who doesn't want you to worship something other than him. This is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to teach you about your true reality, about your greatest potential, about your greatest freedom, and to never fall into certain traps of the world. He's saying, don't be trapped by this dunya. This is Allah literally trying to give you that golden ticket. That Allah saying, don't worship anything from this creation is like, that's a trap. That's a hole. That's not going to give you happiness, not contentment, short-term or long-term. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanallah al-azim. How great, how magnificent, how kind is our Lord. That he said, I really want what's best for you. I truly just don't want you to be in the trap game. I truly just don't want for you to be in slavehood, in servitude to something that cannot truly answer your prayers or comfort your soul or relieve your anxiety. I don't want you to be in constant servitude to that which is going to give you long-lasting unhappiness, while lying, saying that it's paradise. And so, subhanAllah, as we go into the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, inshallah, we go now. Ibrahim alayhi salam is mentioned in over 73 verses of the Quran and in over 25 surahs. This is how much Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is loved by Allah Azza wa Jal. That his devotion, that Ibrahim alayhi salam's devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that for the Muslim is connected to every one of our prayers. Every one of our prayers, we're saying, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi, kama sallaita ala Sayyidina Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Oh Allah. And yes, I know some of you are saying, what's she saying that? Sayyidina? Yeah, because, I'll just speak about that. I'll digress for just a quick moment. I know that in the most basic prayer, we say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala alihi Muhammad. But I'm from the South, right? I'm from old school. And I never even called my mama by her first name. Nor was it ever considered appropriate that I would only call not my mother by her first name, let alone someone of my elder, let alone that was someone that was supposed to be more respected, more loved, more honored than my own mother. So if I remember when we were young, if we were to call someone, an adult, any adult, a teacher by their first name, it was like, whew, it's like sacrilege. Like, these kids have lost their minds. They've lost all respect. They say, you better put a handle on that. Right? A miss, a Mrs., a teacher, or somebody. You better put something in front of their name to let it be known, even just to remind yourself of their rank and their station and who they are and how you should show admiration and respect for them. And so when I look at the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's just, it makes me personally cringe inside to just say, it's different for Allah to say Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. It's different for Allah to send salawat on the Prophet. It says inna Allah malaikatu yusallun ala nabi. That even Allah doesn't say inna Allah malaikatu yusallu ala Muhammad. It doesn't even say Allah and his angels send peace and blessings upon Muhammad. It says inna Allah malaikatu yusallun ala nabi. That even Allah and his angels send salawat upon the Prophet. So with that, I'm like, Allahumma salli ala Nabiyina Muhammad, Sayyidina Muhammad, either our master teacher and spiritual guide Muhammad, or Nabiyina Muhammad. Kama sallaita ala Nabiyina Ibrahim, or Sayyidina Ibrahim, our master teacher Ibrahim. So with that, that Allah Azza wa Jal tells us to send salat, says, "O Allah, send your peace and blessings upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as you sent peace upon Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam." So for the Muslim, this is a constant prayer upon Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Right? This is a constant dua. We have a constant relationship with Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. He was so devoted to Allah Azza wa Jal that Allah made literally all of the prophets that come later are out from his lineage, either from Ishaq alayhi salam or from Ismail alayhi salam. That all of the Anbiya that are coming after Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam are from his lineage. Subhanallah. Talk about a blessed progeny. That this is the level of devotion that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam has to Allah, and the level of elevation and respect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows to the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so with that being said, inshallah, let me make sure that you haven't muted yourself. Please place yourself on mute so that you don't tell all of the details of your business inside your house. Right? We don't want to hear you fussing at your husband or telling your kids to do their homework, inshallah. Okay, bismillah. So going back, bismillah, let me go back, inshallah, and pull it back up. That in Surah Al-Anbiya, which is Surah 21, Al-Anbiya, verse 51. Now, in Surah Al-Anbiya, from the beginning, Allah is addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about monotheism. He's addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the significance of worshiping one God, about the significance of not worshiping the creation. And subhanallah, and so then, of course, who's the best to address in this particular topic other than Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, where Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ أَتَيْنَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ رُشْدَهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَكُنَّ بِهِ عَالِمِينَ. That Allah says, and indeed, we granted Ibrahim sound judgment early on, for we knew him well to be worthy of it. So what I love about this, the first thing is that it says, like, from when he's young, basically, like Allah is saying that from when from young, we gave him sound judgment, right? Like he was guided by us. And Allah says, and we knew him well to be worthy of it. Right? And so from this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like laying the foundation for us to understand that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is one of greatness, right? And that he's been this state of greatness from the time that he's young. And so I'll play some of the ayat really quickly, inshallah, just so that we and then tell the story of it. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
ولقد آتينا إبراهيم رشده من قبل وكنا به عالمين إذ قال لأبيه وقومه ما هذه التماثيل التي أنتم لها عاكفون قالوا وجدنا آباءنا لها عابدين قال لقد كنتم أنتم وآباؤكم في ضلال مبين قالوا أجئتنا بالحق أم أنت من اللاعبين قال بل ربكم رب السماوات والأرض الذي فطرهن وأنا على ذلكم من الشاهدين.
That Allah Azza wa Jal starts at the 51st ayat, the meaning, and says, indeed, we granted Ibrahim sound judgment early on, for we knew him well to be worthy of it. Remember when he questioned his father and his people, what are these statues to which you are so devoted? They replied, we found our fathers worshiping them. He responded, indeed, you and your forefathers have been clearly astray. This one is deep. Now, I want to say, why is this deep? Here it is. There's a young boy. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is a young boy at the time that this conversation is happening between him and his father. I want to say already, I just want to give the warning that we will cover the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam probably in about 2 or 3 sessions, because his story is so long and so lengthy and there's so much to it. We want to make sure, inshallah, that we do it with justice. And so we won't try to cram all the story of our beloved Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam inside of this one session. But going over that, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he grew up in an area of Babylon. He was born in Babylon, and his father was an idol maker. So his father, he grew up actually watching his father, Azar, who would then cut down trees and he would carve them into different idols. And then he would also take stone and he would chisel it into different idols of different sizes. And then also according to people's asks. So, for example, it was known that they might have some idols, depending on, here's another thing, depending on your budget, right? Meaning if you were of a lesser economic, if you were a lesser economic rank, then you might get a wooden one, right? Then a certain type of wood at that. And then if you were, and it might be smaller. And so also, that Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam watched his father Azar literally make these idols either out of wood or out of stone, depending on your economic status, would determine what kind of materials they were made out of, also determining what size they were, in addition to depending on what you wanted the idol for. So, for example, if you were concerned about would Allah hear you, then you might get an idol with very large ears. If you wanted Allah to see you, then you might get an idol that had very large eyes. The majority of the face might be eyes. You see a lot of masks in certain carvings like that where the eyes are very large. If you wanted fertility, there would be certain idols that carried, let's just say, certain characteristics or certain body parts that might be emphasized, that were for fertility. If you wanted one that was for money, you might get one that had larger hands. And so literally, it was almost like a made to order type idol. And so Ibrahim alayhi salam would be looking at his father, making these idols, and would say to his father, like, what are you doing? Right? Literally, this is what the verse says. that he would ask him, like, what are you doing? And he would say, I'm making these idols. And then he would say to him, like, for what purpose, right? And then he would explain to him, well, I'm making them for the purpose that people would come, they would buy them and they would worship them according to their need. And so when he's listening to his father, give this explanation, and he sees this going on back and forth. And majority of the scholars say that Ibrahim alayhi salam is probably around the age of 7 at the time that he's having some of these very initial conversations with his father about the idols. And so he begins actually to start to pray to Allah Azza wa Jal and ask, right? Like, to begin to talk to Allah, because already he knows that Ibrahim alayhi salam has the insight and the ability to see that, wait a minute, I watched you, right, go out, chop down the wood, or go bring in the rock, bring in the stone. I watched you carve it out yourself. I watched you do it according to the needs of those who asked. I watched you with your own hands chisel this and then sell it to people, and then watch them bow down or pray to it. So already there's a level of also intellect, aql, right? What's called an intellectual judgment, that inside of, when we're learning about aqidah, we learn about customary judgments. A customary judgment is water is wet, sugar is sweet. They're things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us in order to be able to interact with the dunya, right? So hot water is hot, it will burn, right? Or I don't want to go too far into aqidah in this moment, but that hot water can cause an effect, right? So then teaching us how to interact inside the world. So this will be a customary judgment. Then there are intellectual judgments. There are judgments by which we're able to look at something and give a particular reason to it and say, well, based upon this and this, and based upon proof that this doesn't add up. So that which is almighty, right, cannot be carved and chipped away at. So that which is going to, create something cannot itself be created. And if something is going to be omnipresent, right, then it cannot be the case where first it was nothing and then you brought it into something. And so this intellectual judgment, Ibrahim is beginning to exercise even as a young boy. So when we hear this conversation of Ibrahim alayhi salam going out and, talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as many of us may remember as children, where, I don't know about you, but I remember standing outside when especially I'm from Florida. So in Florida, we have these huge, tall evergreen trees and like huge pine trees. And for whatever reason, it used to be my thing. I would run outside and just like as it began to rain and the trees would begin to sway. And I had, heard the old people say that when it rained, that God was doing his work. And so, I would run outside like and kind of nestle myself between these tall trees and would just start to pray and say, okay, God, what are you working now? Right? What are you about to send now? When you send this rain, what's coming with it? What are you working on right now? And so Ibrahim alayhi salam, when I hear the story of Ibrahim as a child, being about between the ages of 7 and 10, going out and standing, at the sun, but talking to Allah and saying, Allah, are you like, are you the sun? And then when the sun disappears, he said, no, I don't like the things that said, right? That he has what he's understanding is if it comes and it goes, if there is an inconsistency, then it cannot be Allah. And so then he asked the moon, like, Allah, is this your expression? Right? Because even the moon will will sometimes shine even in the morning. You can still see the imprint of the moon. And so he says, well, Allah, are you the moon? Right? It's like, and then the moon fades. And he said, no, I don't like the things that said. And then he asked the stars. Well, there's some, because he knows there are also people during this particular time in Babylon that used to worship the stars. So this was also a religious practice of people looking toward the stars for answers and answers to their questions, or even finding out when they should do things, when they should, when they should plant certain things, or, just very similar to things that we have today, that people chart their stars in order to make certain decisions about their life. So he's asking, based upon that, Allah, are you the stars? And then it sets, and he says, no. What the intellectual judgment that he arrives at is that my Lord is the creator of all of those things, which is like the cornerstone of our aqidah, the recognition, right? That the power does not lie in the created things, but the power lies in the creator of the things. And so, therefore, not putting my trust in that which comes and goes, not putting all of my belief and my hope and my faith on that which is transient, right? That which is not eternal. And so, subhanallah, Ibrahim alayhi salam, even as a child, was able to figure that out. And so when he comes to his father, right, and he says to his father, like, who is it that told you like this was God, and his father's like, listen, this is what we found our forefathers doing, right? He says in that verse, and in ayat 53, he says, this is what we found our forefathers worshiping, right? He doesn't even say, like, I believe that they're almighty. He doesn't even say, I believe that, they have powers. There's no explanation like that given. And this is important because we begin to see this show up another time in this conversation between Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and his father and the people, right? He doesn't attribute belief to them. And this goes back to Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Habibina Muhammad. This goes back to other people that Allah mentions in the Quran, that if you ask them who is the creator, they will say Allah. Right? They will say Allah. So they believe in Allah, but this is kind of like, they understand who their Lord is, but in terms of that which they're attributing worship, right? Or even worshiping Allah through something else or by something else, that this is an act of shirk. Right? I want us to just think about this in our lives. It's not a matter of saying, I don't believe in Allah. It's not a matter of saying that I don't believe that God has power. It's not a matter of saying that I don't believe, yes, Allah is the creator of the wood and the stone, but what it is I'm directing my worship toward, my intention toward, is that which is an aspect of creation. Right? And this is the line in the sand when it comes to Islam and other deens and other practices and other religious belief. It's not that they don't believe in Allah. That's not the question. They believe in Allah. Allah says that in the Quran. You ask them, they say, I believe in Allah. It's the fact that they put an intermediary, an intercessor between them and Allah Azza wa Jal. Not in terms of like, can you speak for me? Can you advocate for me? No. This is not like you ask the Sheikh, can you make dua for me? Even though, yes, you can make dua for yourself. This is about attributing acts of what's the word I want to, divinity. This is about attributing a certain quality of that being worthy of worship, which is why in our deen of Islam, we say, La ilaha illa. Like, the first part is a negation. The first part is a complete negation. There is no God except Allah. Meaning anything else that you're defining as worthy of worship is not. That's literally what it means. La ilaha. There is nothing that is worthy of worship. There is no reason to worship any. There is none in this creation that is worthy of your thinking that they are divine. Nothing from khalq, nothing from creation, nothing from this world. None and nothing. Nothing with a name, with a none. Not a person, not an object, not an animal, not a wind, not a nothing. None. La ilaha. That's the first part of Islam. There is no God except Allah. Because that which becomes defined, like then you would say, well, who is Allah? Because based upon many, and this is important, because based upon someone else's definition, if someone says, well, I don't believe in God. So, well, that depends on what your definition of God is. If you tell me something from creation, I'm going to say, well, you're right. Right? If you tell me something that is transient, I'm going to say, well, you're right. If you say that which is has humanistic qualities, that is anthropomorphic, we're going to say, well, you're right. If you give me anything that's other than that which is almighty all the time, right? Almighty, all powerful at all times, right? Has ultimate and absolute will, then okay. But that which has no will, that which is not al-hayy, not just alive, but the source and the cause and the means by which all other life is dependent upon and exists, that all other existence is dependent upon, then I don't know. Ibrahim said, you worship these idols and they can't see, they can't hear, they can't answer your question. They don't have any intellect to answer anything. So if you tell me you worship something, right? Someone's exposed to someone who worships that which cannot see or hear or respond or answer, then I say, well, you're right. La ilaha. But Allah is something different. That's a different case.
Sheikha, I have a question about this. Assalamu alaikum.
Hold on one second. I'm going to go to Q&A in just a minute, inshallah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So with that being said, this becomes something that is key for us to understand about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? Is that what he's giving us from this beginning is our most basic aspect of Aqidah. That he said, like it becomes like, yes, all the other Anbiya are teaching us about Allah Azza wa Jal. As we know, Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, his case is about idols, right? We know that their case is about idols. We even talked about even the case of Saleh, their case is about idols. But in this case, it's not just the idols in general, as it is about the understanding, right? Of who Allah is and who he's not. Now we get into that, like that real underlying understanding. Now we get into what for us as Muslims begins to really define for us our in-depth creed. And what she reminded me of, subhanAllah, we are 4 minutes into the end of our class. And so with that being said, wait, no, give me a couple more minutes. Just a couple more minutes. Hold tight, inshallah, just so we cover this section, inshallah. And so he says, have you come to, Ibrahim says, when his father Azar answers, we found our fathers worshipers of them. He said, well, indeed, Ibrahim responds. Right? He responds. Indeed, you and your fathers have been clearly astray. Listen to this child, right? Saying like, well, if that's what you were doing, then you and your forefathers have clearly been misguided, right? You went astray somewhere. And they asked, right? So now they're asking Ibrahim, have you come to us with the truth, or is this a joke? Have you come to us with the truth, or this is a joke? He replied, in fact, your Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth, who created them both, and to that I bear witness. Right? That Prophet Ibrahim at this moment is saying, your Lord is the one that he is the originator of the heavens and the earth. Not just in terms of this down on the ground, but everything in front of you, subhanallah, everything in front of you. And so this begins, the beginning. I will stop there, inshallah. This begins the beginning of what becomes a conflict for Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, when subhanallah, in the beginning of this conflict, as if you're not on mute, please put thank you. Allahumma salli wa sallam ala Muhammad. And so inside of these Allahumma salli wa sallam ala Muhammad, this is the beginning of one of the beginning of the story of Prophet Ibrahim that starts to get him in trouble with his people, right? Is because there's like this kind of herd mentality that, even though later on we find out, right, that when what happens is like, he's like, I'm sick of this. You guys know inside your heart that this is wrong, right? You guys know inside. And that's what kufr is. Kufr comes from the term kafar, that means to cover up. Because the fitrah, the origin of a human being, knows it doesn't take much for even the intellect to be engaged to say that this is not Allah Almighty. Right? It doesn't take much for that. So when he presents it to them and their argument is about, well, this is from, right? This is what we found our forefathers on. And so, well, there's opportunity for you to be guided aright at every moment. That somehow, somewhere along the way, somebody got misguided. Right? And your Lord is the Lord of the wood, of the stone, of the earth. Your Lord is the one who created that which you cannot create. Right? He is the originator of the heavens and the earth. That's who Allah Azza wa Jal is. Right? And so Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So when they say to him in this moment, right? Like, okay, so they're planning for this big party, this big event, and they're, saying they're going out. So Ibrahim is like, I'm just so sick of this. So they ask him, are you going? And he's like, I'm sick. I'm not joining you. Now, him saying that he's sick and he's not joining them in that moment, he's making it like, I'm just sick to my stomach. Like, I'm sick of this kufr. I'm sick of this disbelief. I'm sick of this cognitive dissonance. Like, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. You watch this man make these idols with his own hands, and then you fall down and worship and pray to it. Like, I'm sick of it. I'm done. So they leave. They go to the party, and he then comes and he stands. Ibrahim alayhi salam comes and he stands in front of the idols, and he starts talking to them. He starts asking them questions. And who are you? And what's your power? And what do you do? Right? And as he's asking them, and they said, oh, you can't hear me? Oh, you don't want to answer me? Oh, you have no power to speak and to answer me? And then, subhanAllah, he begins to take a sledgehammer to them, basically. So, oh, you can't, it's literally, subhanAllah, in the description of it, I find it so beautiful. He's like, oh, you can't answer me? And then he just smacks them and crushes them into pieces one by one, until then the people come back, right? The people come back from the party, and they're like, what have you done? Oh, Ibrahim, what have you done? Right? And he tells them, like, ask the big one. He leaves one, the biggest one. They're like, what happened here? What is this mess? Oh, these idols are crushed and crumbled. What have you done? And he says, ask the big one what happened. He's like saying to them, use your brain. Let's get a little intellect. This isn't hard. I, as a child, had figured this out. He says, ask the big one. They say, oh, Ibrahim, come on. You know he can't talk. Right? And Ibrahim says, you're right. He can't. He can't. He can't even hear us. So you have a power that he doesn't have, and yet you're worshiping him as if he's the Almighty. Right? So then they give that, like, he did it. He turns his fingers like this, right? 3 pointing to himself. He did it. And this becomes the beginning of the people's plot against Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, where they begin to say, okay, we're about to destroy your son Al-Azhar, right? And he tries to many times. He's like, he goes to his son, like, what happened? Tell me. Did you do this? All right, this is a father speaking to his son, like, why did you do this? And Ibrahim is like, talk to him. I'm trying to show you something. He tells his father, Allah has given me a knowledge that he hasn't given you. Meaning, Allah has shown me something that he hasn't shown you. He's not disrespectful. He's not rude, right? Daddy, Baba, listen, Abi. Maybe what you believe is not correct. And maybe Allah has told me something that I'm supposed to tell you. And so, subhanAllah, there becomes a kufr in that moment, a covering up of the truth. Right? A covering up. Because there's Allah Ta'ala mentions in these ayat that for a moment they stop. When Ibrahim asked them, they stop and check themselves. They start looking at each other. When he says, you're right, it can't talk, it can't speak, they look at each other. And then they say, no. This is what our forefathers worship. They throw the truth of that the fitrah speaks to them about. Their own fitrah speaks to them about how this is not possible. And yet they throw it behind their back and continue upon the religion of their ancestors. And subhanAllah, this becomes the end of or should I say the beginning, because he's still young. He hasn't even had children yet. So, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
If you would like to listen to more, please donate to www.icnyu.org/donate. For more of our virtual programs, go to www.icnyu.org/classes. If you have any questions, email us at info@icnyu.org.